How's it going? I'm Azumeo. This is Iago, baby, and this is Zazu Bear. Iago, Zazu. Zazu, Iago. He's the boy, she's the girl. Boy, girl. Girl, boy. Iago, Zazu, Zazu, Iago, Iago, Zazu, Azum. Okay, so Azumeo here, and I'm not sure exactly where to start, so we'll do this. I always try and help people know if they're in the right place or not as soon as possible. So I'll say this to you right now, and it'll help you know if you should be here or not. So to get us all on the same page, this is all about learning how to buy and sell companies and real estate, and my friends and I have invented some pretty cool ways to do it. You can do it with no money down, no credit checks, no loans, in less than 20 hours a week, and eventually without leaving your house. And on each deal that you do, the minimum that you should make is $10,000 to $30,000 a month. 10 to 30 grand a month. So if that's not what you want to know how to do, then this page is not for you. But if that is what you want to know how to do, then this page is for you, and you are in the exact right place. And in that case, in the case that you're in the right place and this is what you want, in that case, I want you to watch this class very carefully, because this moment can be one of those things that happens in your life that changes everything, and I really mean that. Now maybe it won't. Maybe after going through this, it makes no difference in how you see the world or how you see your role in the world and how you see the goals and ambitions of your life. Maybe that'll all change, or maybe it won't. And if it doesn't, if that's the case, then we could still be friends, and maybe we can work out something else together. But for the right person, today's class is the beginning of a journey that will change your life and have a ripple effect on lives all around you. And to all the people who I see struggling or don't know where to turn, I want to make sure that you have a chance at seeing what you've been missing. I want you to see the hidden world that you knew was there but you never saw a way to reach. I know what that feels like, and I've seen what this can do, and I've seen the consequences of not learning this. Here's what I mean. This is a picture of my mom. My parents are from India and Pakistan, and only because I was lucky enough to be born in America, that's the only reason I'm able to be here with you today. Now, growing up, my father worked 2 full-time jobs, and he went to school full-time, and that meant that he had up to 90 minutes, or if he was lucky, maybe up to 2 hours to come home, shower, eat, and sleep, all in less than 90 minutes usually. And one of my first memories as a child is seeing my mother sitting on the bed with her hand on his chest, and she was crying because she had to wake him up, and she knew that he got almost no sleep. She was sitting on the bed crying because she had to wake him up. Now imagine doing that to somebody you love, or imagine that being done to somebody you love and seeing that as a child. That's what I saw, and I was always told that everything, all that craziness was being done for me, and it was so that me and my brother and my sister would never have to go through that. And I'll talk more about growing up later, but that image has been burned in my mind. My mother having to wake my father up and crying as she was doing it, because she knew that between jobs and going to school, he was living off of inhuman drive, inhuman ambition, and that situation went on for years. And it's why I want you to pay attention today, because what my family didn't know at the time, what they didn't understand about money, and the reason we struggled with finances for so long when I was growing up, that was all because they didn't understand what you and I are going to cover here today. And it's because of that image in my mind, that I want to make sure that you carefully watch this and you learn what they did not. This isn't for everybody. This is not for everybody. I know that. I get that. I understand that. But I want to make sure that everybody who I'm lucky enough to meet or come across, I want to make sure that all my people understand what I'm about to cover. I want to make sure that everybody at least gets the chance, the opportunity to understand what's really happening in the world right now, and to understand the situation that we're in today. You know, it's funny because everybody in my family went to college and got like real serious degrees. You know, they became doctors and lawyers and scientists, you know, and then there's me. You know, I barely graduated high school, and I never graduated college. And I'm not saying that to be proud or as if it's, you know, cool not to go to school. I'm actually kind of embarrassed about it, and I am taking classes right now. The reason I'm telling you that is because now I get invited to speak at places like Oxford University, Harvard Business School, and even for the United Nations. And it's kind of ironic given my academic background that I'm getting invited to places like that, but one of the main reasons that they asked me to come is because of what I'm about to share with you right now. So I'll say this again. If this is what you want to learn how to do, how to buy and sell companies and real estate creatively the way that we've invented, make 10 to 30 grand a month on each deal that you do, and do it subtractively and etc. If this is what you want to know how to do, all this stuff, in that case, then if financially speaking, then our time here today, this is probably the most important thing that you'll ever come across. So let's get started. I'll come back to all this in a second. First, we need to talk about something much more important called income ascension. So imagine that this line represents low income people, then up here we have high income people, then at the very top of high income we have the very high income people. We'll call them the dreaded word that the media has used to vilify them, the 1%, the evil 1%, right? So then in between we have middle income. Now every country, every group of people measure and track how well people move from down here to up here. It's a really important measure that tells us about the health of a given economy. Now this process, this movement is called income ascension or social mobility, and it's a measure of how well people move up through income classes. It tells us how elastic parental income is on future generations. Now in America, America, and most people in America don't realize or appreciate this, but we are in the top 5% of the world. So we hardly represent what life is like for the normal human being on the planet. We're in that lucky top 5% of the world. In America, you truly can go as far and as high as you want. The American dream, right? Well, here's the real question. In America, what kind of social mobility do we have? In the land of opportunity, what kind of social mobility or income ascension do we see? Well, since this is America, people obsess over this, and all the experts and analysts and social scientists agree on one thing. In America, social mobility has gotten worse and worse to a point where it's almost non-existent. Here's a Harvard study that said the United States has been historically viewed as the land of opportunity, a society in which a child's chances of succeeding do not depend heavily on her parents. But there's growing evidence that intergenerational income mobility in the U.S. is actually much lower. Here's the New York Times, harder for Americans to rise. That's the title of the article. Many researchers have concluded that Americans enjoy less economic mobility. Here's the Washington Post. Social mobility erodes the American dream, and there's countless, so that's the media, then there's countless other non-profit groups. There's studies like this, Pew's Economic Mobility Project. They all say basically the same thing. These statistics are very depressing. That's a direct quote. And I could keep going with people. I could keep going with non-profit groups. I could keep going with the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, across the board. But it's not just journalists, it's not just the media, and it's not just non-profit groups, but even in the academic world. The University of Michigan, which is something of the official authority on the American economy, they published the famous Consumer Confidence Report. They're a pretty big deal, and they did the most exhaustive study to date, and they concluded that social mobility is a myth. That's an actual quote right there. They called it a myth. And you can even turn to the government at the highest level. Here's the head of the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. It's the official, unbiased, most trusted authority when it comes to economic numbers, the CBO. This guy was also a presidential advisor and the economic mobility specialist. And when he was faced with the evidence, he didn't even try to deny or argue the facts. Instead, he said it's more important that people think that social mobility exists than it is that social mobility actually exists. So even when the government admits the problem, which, that probably says more than anything else, right? It's like things are so obviously bad that even the government won't even try to lie about it. The bottom line is that everybody who studies this and looks at the numbers always comes to the same obvious conclusion, that even in America, even in the land of opportunity, social mobility sucks. Any statistician, any researcher that knows what they're talking about, they will all tell you that you have almost no chance of getting there. And that's really what this means to you. Let's assume you're a person with average income, or you may be down here like my family was when I was growing up, or you may be up here, or maybe you're way up here. But right now, let's assume that you start in the middle or below the middle. We'll call this guy Bob. And it's important that he's starting in the middle or well below the middle, because that's the real test of your skill. How well you can use your skill to climb income levels. Because as it stands, the idea that you can start at an average income level and reach the 1% or really experience any kind of income class mobility, this idea, the idea of doing this, going on this journey, the idea of starting from here and going up to here, this journey is considered nearly impossible. For most people, getting there will never happen. And when I say there, by the way, I'm referring to the 1%, which brings up an interesting question. How much money does it take to get in the 1%? People talk about this all the time, but how many people define mathematically what the 1% is? Well, again, this has been studied and tracked, so we don't have to speculate. The exact number has been calculated. According to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and the Census Bureau and the IRS, to be in the 1%, to be in the top 1% of America, there is a range of annual income from $340,000 to $380,000 a year. So we'll take the exact middle of that, $360,000 a year, which comes out to about $30,000 US dollars a month. $30,000 a month. So to be in the 1%, you need a monthly income of $30,000 a month. That's 30 grand a month. Now you may recognize that number. It's one reason why I always say that when you work on a deal or a company that you need to make sure that you make at least 10 to 30 grand a month on each deal that you do. And that 10 grand a month, by the way, where did that come from? Well, if you look at those numbers, those reports that just pulled up, the top 10% of America is about $105,000 to $115,000 a year. Now 10 grand a month is $120,000 a year. So if you're making 10 to 30 grand a month on each deal that you do, that means on every deal that you do, you're getting in the top 10 to the top 1%. Now there's a few reasons that this is important. First of all, it's a good practice to add a minimum allowable threshold to your ambitions, but on top of that, there's several reasons. Here are just 3 big reasons that you want to get in, that you need to get in the top 1%. Now first of all, I'd say that if I have to convince you why you need to make at least $30,000 a month, then you're probably not going to make a great student. But just so that we all get on the same page, here are some things to consider. Number 1, nearly all the financial benefits only go to the 1%. All of the financial benefits in America only go, just about all of them, only go to the top 1%. Over the last several decades, not just the last few years, but the last several decades, in fact, ever since they started tracking these numbers, every single U.S. president has admitted that nearly all the economic growth and nearly all the financial benefits only go to the people at the top. Here's the CBO, the most trusted and quoted government agency. Remember we talked about them earlier? Look at this. Here's a report they put out. Look at who's benefited from all the economic activity. It's pretty much only the top 10%. But even then, the 1% made 3 times as much as the top 10%. And notice, they're not saying that a majority or a large share of the benefit only goes to the 1%. They're pretty much saying that all of it, pretty much all of the financial benefit only goes to the top 1%. The top 10% getting there is acceptable, but really the top 1% is where you need to be. Now, big reason number 2 that you need to get in the 1% is because the people there live in a completely different world. Everything from healthcare, food quality, life expectancy, divorce rate, crime rates. And in a little bit, I'm going to come back to this one because I can personally tell you that having money can be the difference between life and death. I'll come back to this one later, but here's a quote from the University of Michigan study that I mentioned earlier. They said that it is impossible to explain how much of an advantage high-income households provide their children and their next generation. It's as if they live in a different world that is only available to them and others like them with high incomes. And like I said, we'll come back to this just to see how much of a difference this world can make, but this brings us to number 3. The third reason that you need to get in the 1% is probably the most important. That is the generational impact. The opportunities that you'll provide for your next generation. Even if you don't have kids and you don't want kids, there are young people that you care about. There are causes that you care about. There are people who you want to see do better. And if you don't provide them with the right opportunities or the right education or the right ability to capitalize on the right opportunities, then you are sentencing them to generations of financial darkness. And if that sounds too dark, just wait a second and I'll show you what I mean. But here's a quick example. MIT did a joint study with Princeton and they saw that the average prison inmate who was serving more than 10 years as a child before they started school, they had a vocabulary of about 200 to 300 words. The average middle income child had a vocabulary of about 400 to 500 words. And the average future 1%er as a child before they started school, they had a vocabulary of about 600 to 700 words. But this shows us how early we see the difference. And by the way, with all these children, this was before they started school. And that disparity just grows and grows with time and it lasts for generations. And this will become more clear as we move forward, but for now, let's move on. So those are the 3 main reasons of why you need to get in the 1%. Now I could keep going, but my point is that if you're going to make this a priority, if you want to get serious about mastering the skill of making money, then why would you settle for anything less than the 1%? And 30 grand a month isn't that much money. You know, it's not Bill Gates money. It's only $30,000 a month. It's amazing that you can get in the 1% so easily. But it doesn't seem that way when you consider how nearly impossible it looks for people to get there, right? So why is it so tough for people in America to rise in income classes? Why is it such a hard journey that so few people do it? It's considered a myth. Well, here's another interesting piece of information. For the average person to get in the 1%, I want you to think about how long it takes. I want you to guess. Really think about this for a second and guess. How long does it take? Although social mobility almost never happens, in the rare situation where it does happen, where somebody is in the 1%, how long did it take for that person to get there? Think about it. Was it months? Years? Was it a full decade? Or maybe it was decades? What do you think? Think about it. I want you to come up with an answer. How long does it take to get in the 1%? Think about the number that you came up with, okay? Now here's the real answer. On average, it takes about, you ready for this? 250 to 300 years. Yes, 250 to 300 years. Isn't that crazy? It's not decades, but centuries. 250 to 300 years. It's not a sprint or even a marathon, but the journey of economic stability in America is a generational relay that spans across lifetimes. Now, if you were born in America and you've lived in America your whole life, it might be harder for you to appreciate this, but it is easier for me because although I was born in America, I have lived in places that most people only see on the news. So when we didn't have money, we moved around a lot, and I've lived in some pretty crazy places. And I've lived with family all over the place, from Israel and Palestine and Turkey and unsettled regions of Eastern Europe, all over the place. I've lived with family all over the place. But it all started, the core of that, see, my parents are from India and Pakistan. My grandfather came from a real strong military family. He was actually a prisoner in Germany during World War II, and he was tortured for years. And eventually he was killed in combat long before I was born. And it was because of his service that his family was taken care of and given preferable status. And through better education and opportunities, my father and I had aunts and uncles that were able to get into places, into countries with better opportunities, with more opportunities. That's how my father was able to get to America. And because of that, I was lucky enough to be born in America. And on that day, on the day that I was born, I walked into more opportunity and more potential than my father or grandfather ever had. But the chain of events that allowed me to have the life I have now, those events started decades before I was ever born. And I had nothing to do with them. It was no reflection of my skill or intelligence or any kind of merit that I deserved. I just got lucky. So although I grew up broke, I was constantly told by tell everybody around me that in this magical place that I was lucky enough to be in America, I can be anything, do anything. And it's always funny to me when people talk about how modest and humble I am. At first I'd say it's funny because I don't think I'm anywhere near done. We have so much further to go and we have a lot more to do. But more importantly, I have appreciation. I have gratitude for what was given to me, what I don't deserve that was given to me, for the generational journey and suffering that others went through that I got to benefit from. And it's one of the reasons why I have never, not once in my life, ever gone on vacation or even on purpose taken a full day off. Bill Gates worked every day for 7 years before he took a day off. He actually told me that once when I met him. So it's not that crazy. And although people do think I'm crazy for never taking a day off, but what people don't realize is that in America, every day is a vacation. And I recommend you study your family lineage as well. It'll give you a better perspective and you'll develop a much deeper sense of gratitude when you see how many people risked and sacrificed so much so that you could get to be in America. Because you'll see that although it may seem like your story is much different from mine is just more recent. That's why it's important for you to go and look back and see how far back your story really goes. So many times we become so focused, so myopic, and so, focused on trivial BS that we allow our attention to be too self-centered. And it can really help to be more grateful to the people who gave their all so that you can have a chance at a better life. It's important to take a step back from your life and look at the generations before you and how you got to where you are right now, and then look at the generations to come and what kind of impact you want to have on them, what kind of difference you want to make, what kind of change you want to create in the world. Now, I know that this kind of thinking is not common, but shouldn't it be? When you take on a broader perspective like this, by realizing how much was done for you, you develop much more gratitude. And it's this kind of thinking that has shaped my life more than anything else. And I think it'll be really helpful to you as well. There are two brilliant filmmakers, the Wachowskis. They made the Matrix movies, and more recently, they made one of my favorite movies that come out in the last few years. It's called Cloud Atlas. It's based on a book. And although the movie isn't perfect, when you see what they were trying to do, what they were trying to pull off, and the scale of the story that they wanted to tell, it's really inspiring. The idea is just so hard to pull off that almost no movie even tries. And the official summary of that movie, it's a good example of everything that I'm talking about. Here it is. I love this. Here's the exact quote on what the movie is all about. An exploration of how the actions of individual lives impact one another in past, present, and future, as one soul is shaped from a killer into a hero, and an act of kindness ripples across centuries to inspire a revolution. I love that. The fact that our lives are not our own and our actions have ripples that span across centuries. It's a brilliant realization, and this really should guide everything that you do. Like I said, it's this thinking, this sense of where I am in a generational sense, and the gratitude that comes with it that's really shaped my thinking more than just about anything else. And I highly recommend you do the same thing. For example, your family probably came to America about 100 years ago or 150 years ago. And by the way, I'm including even Africans in that group, even though the way they came here was, no picnic. The process of servitude or slavery, because 100 and 150 years ago, those were the two major blocks of immigrant surges. And in many of those blocks, about half the immigrants who came here were indentured. And I'm talking about half of the non-African immigrants. They were indentured, which meant that they were going to be servants for the rest of their lives. But they accepted that so that their children could realize the opportunity in America. So although they may have started down here, right, in our social mobility ladder, they may have been down here for the first few generations. And by the way, a generation is defined as 20 to 25 years. So when we say a few generations, that's not a short period of time. That's why in the first few generations, those first immigrants may have seen some upward mobility, right? It's a lot easier to have mobility when you go from being a slave to being, not a slave. But after those first few generations of minor mobility, something happens. They hit what's called an income plateau. Now, these income plateaus usually used to last for about 3 to 5 generations. Right now, the plateaus are lasting for a lot longer than that, and roughly 99% of people in America are stuck in a plateau with seemingly no way out. Now, it's important to have this perspective when we consider Bob. Remember our guy with the average income? Because he has tremendous odds against him. And on average, he's about 250 to 300 years away from any significant social mobility. But here's another important concept called a mobility asset. What this means is that in order for this guy to make any significant jump in his income class, he needs a mobility asset of some sort. So let's say he's the first person in his family to go to college, or he inherits some money, or he wins the lottery or something like that. Those are technically mobility assets, at least for the short term, but they almost never last. You may remember we did a story on lottery winners and tracked how many of them fell into depression and suicide, and nearly all of them ended up broke. So it's not about the money, it's about the skill. But we're only interested in long-term mobility assets that have a long-lasting change, a change that lasts for generations. So not only does our hero here climb income classes, but he stays there, and so do his children, and their children, and their children for generations to come. That's why I said it's important to, when people say the game of life, it's important to play that game on a larger scale. Look at the date you were born, look at the year you were born, and go back 100 100 years, and then look forward 100 years in the future and consider what was done for you and what you're going to do and what impact you're going to have on a larger scale. You get what I'm saying? When you think along these lines, when you have this perspective, it should really change the view you have on your role on a larger scale. So a mobility asset like this is very, very rare. And on the surface, it seems like the answer is business, right? That's the simple answer. Just about the only way for the average person to climb these income classes is to start a business of their own. A business that has the potential for the kind of income that he needs. That seems like the answer, right? But actually that is not the answer, but it's close. We'll go over the real answer in a second, but first let's see why that is not the answer. To really understand this, we need to look at the 1% and dissect who is in that group and how they got there. So if we look at the 1%, here's what we see according to the BLS and the CBO. About 35% of the people, this is just the 1% now, we're looking at the 1%. So about 35% of those people are professionals, like bankers, Wall Street fat cats, Ivy Leaguers. These are like money people, right? Another 25% are highly educated and skilled professionals, like doctors, surgeons, lawyers, people like that. So that's 60% so far. Then another 5 to 10% inherited their wealth, and then another 5 to 10% are celebrities like actors and professional athletes. So far that's 80% of the 1%, and you may notice a pattern developing, but let's keep going. Of the remaining 20%, less than half of them will remain in the 1%. That leaves us with just 10%. Now less than half of that 10% got there with a business that they started. That leaves us with 5%. Of that 5%, less than half of them got there in less than 15 to 20 years. That leaves us with 2.5%. And of that 2.5% of the 1%, of that group, less than half of them got into the 1% in less than 10 to 15 years. That leaves us with 1.25%, 1.25%. Now of that group, less than half of them got there in less than 5 years. So less than 1% of the 1% got there in less than 5 years. Think about that for a second. That means that of all the people in the 1%, less than 1% of that group, less than 1% of the 1% got there in less than 3 to 5 years with a business that they started. In fact, if you look at the major groups like the Wall Street types and the brain surgeons, the interesting thing is that almost all of these people were already in the 1%, or at least in high income households when they were born. And these two groups make up over half of the 1%. Then of the remaining people who stay in the 1%, look at who's left. And it's basically people that inherited money or inherited a family business, and they usually started in high income households from birth, which pretty much leaves us with only celebrities. In other words, for over 9 out of 10 people in the 1%, they were either born rich or it's people like Tom Cruise or Michael Jordan. So that's about the only path for over 9 out of 10 people in the 1%. So think about what that means for the average guy. It's like you're either born rich or you become the next movie star, or if you start a business, then maybe you'll get there in 15 to 20 years if you're lucky. And that would be considered fast. But even then, even if you're given decades to make this journey with your business, even then it almost never happens. Remember, the word used to describe this is myth. And now that you look at the numbers, you see why, right? You see the problem here? This is why people say that social mobility is nearly impossible, because if you look at the numbers, it definitely seems that way. Now here's something I want to make perfectly clear about all of this stuff. I'm not saying any of this to discourage or demotivate you. I just want to make sure the challenge of the road ahead is crystal clear. To the people who think that being lazy is okay, or to anybody who is ready to settle for financial mediocrity because it's just the easy way out, or even to the people who say things like, I just want to make a little extra money. Those aspirations are so inconsequential and meaningless that it's a waste of time to even discuss. This is not easy. But the question isn't how easy is it, it's how worthwhile is it. If you want to start a new business and get in the 1% in less than 5 years, doing that requires a skill that almost nobody in the world knows how to do. Even people in the 1%, in fact, less than 1% of the people in the 1% know how to do it or have done it. It's why it's so important to look at things from the perspective of Bob, a guy with average income. How is he going to get there? What path is available to him? We know that he needs a mobility asset. And remember earlier when we talked about the mobility asset being a business, how it really wasn't just a business, it was something more than that. And the reason for that, the reason it's not just a business is because there's so few companies that will actually do what we want them to do and take somebody from an ordinary income to one of our desirable incomes. It's not as easy as just starting a business. And I've talked about this so many times, but just to clarify this again, the success rates for business are absolutely terrible. 9 out of 10 fail in the first 2 years. And although that's not technically the whole truth because the company may still be in existence, I'm talking about companies that actually make the owner any money. Not big money, but a company that makes the owner a single penny. And normally it takes 5 years before a business will provide a regular income for the owner. But in that 5 years, they almost all fail. It's why banks want to see a 2-year business history when they give loans, because they know that in 2 years, almost every company is history. So 9 out of 10 fail in the first 2 years. Of those survivors, 9 out of 10 of them fail in the first 3 to 5 years. Of those survivors, 9 out of 10 of them fail in the first 7 to 10 10 years. These numbers get exponentially worse. And think about those last two numbers, by the way. Remember to start a business yourself that'll get you the 1% in just 5 years. Doing that seems nearly impossible, and it's easy to see why, because when you look at the numbers, you see that almost no business survives more than a few years, let alone 5 years or longer. So they're barely surviving that long, let alone making the owner the 30 grand a month that's needed to be in the 1%. So the number of companies that actually survive is terrible. But then the number of companies that make the owner any money at all, those numbers are even worse. So when we're talking about the kind of company that's going to make you any money, let alone $10,000, let alone $30,000 a month or more. I mean, we're just 30 grand a month is just the beginning. We want to go more than that. But when we talk about companies that make any money, this is so rare that we're talking about such a tiny fraction out of millions and millions of people. Imagine an entire Super Bowl stadium full of business owners, or an Indy 500, 400,000 or 500,000 people, and only a small car full will ever have a business that makes them just $10,000 in a 30-day period. It doesn't mean that the 10 grand a month is regular. It's just that at one point in the life of the business, they did make 10 grand a month from their business. They did make $10,000 in 1 month from their business. And these folks, these business owners will work an average of 60 hours a week. And if they stop working, they'll lose money. If they stop, so does the money. They'll work 60 hours a week at least, usually. They'll usually work at least 60 hours a week to basically go broke. They don't have a real business. They have a job. And they're deep into debt. They have loans. They've signed personal guarantees. They're over leveraged. On and on and on. You name it. It's crazy. And that's why when we brought up the idea of a business as a mobility asset, it's not really that simple. You need something else. You need something much more powerful, much more significant than just a business. Think of it this way. You probably represent the economic journey of about 100 to 150 years, like we just talked about, right? So on average, if you're lucky, you have about 100 to 150 years left on your journey, so that somebody in your future generations may be financially strong enough to be in the 1%. But that's only if you started a business or if you found a way to break the plateau that nearly all of us are in. If you haven't even done that, then this 150 years that you have left, that clock hasn't even started yet. That's why out of every 100 people in America, about 99 of them are in an income plateau. And these plateaus used to last for just 3 to 5 generations. Now they're lasting for 2 and 3 times that. And in order to break out of that plateau, and make any serious progress, you basically have to make a journey of several hundred years, and you have to condense it so dramatically that the smartest people in the world will tell you that it's impossible. It's like running a 26-mile marathon in less than 10 minutes. But you should see now, right? You should see that this really is what you want to do. There is this journey that almost nobody completes, and when they do, it usually takes hundreds of years, but you want to make that same journey, and you want to do it overnight. Now, in order to do that, you've got to be really, really smart about it. You got to be smarter than the average bear. I mean, just think about it for a second. If it takes hundreds of years to do something, you won't do it overnight just by working harder. You have to work smarter, much smarter. So what's the real mobility asset if it isn't just a business? Here it is. And understanding this simple ingredient is the key to changing the world. The real mobility asset, it's not just a business, but it's the right training, or here it is, education. Some people think it's opportunity, but opportunity is only as good as the education you have to realize. Think about world hunger, for example. There's no shortage of food on the planet. There's just a shortage of people that know how to get it or know how to obtain the resources to get food. So when we talk about education, the right kind of education, the kind that you and I are talking about, it trains you and it trains anybody, and it allows somebody to build a company the right way, to build your business in such a way that you can start from zero and travel through income classes at light speed. When you do it correctly, you can start building companies around causes that you care about, and you can help other people make the same income ascension. And understanding how to do this for other people is a powerful way to change the world. In fact, there's almost nothing in this world that you will ever do that will have a larger or more meaningful impact than helping others realize this opportunity. This is how you change the world. Now, am I being dramatic when I say change the world? It's funny, when people see the stuff that my guys are doing, everybody gets it. Here's a few examples of what my friends, the people on our team, our students, and the kids are doing right now. And understand that this is all based on the same skill set. My friends are doing some crazy badass stuff. I'm talking about, like the single largest self-sustaining wild animal and elephant sanctuary in Africa, responsible for saving thousands of animal and human lives. And they've also helped with the R&D and invention of better and more friendly harvesting equipment. It's been called one of the most significant humanitarian advances in that region in the last decade. These guys have worked with refugees and built some of the fastest growing self-sustained farming communities in the world. This is being used as a model to fight starvation. Also, you may not know this, but slavery is still around, and in many ways it's much worse today than it's ever been before. And these guys have developed the first international model that allows families and even children to buy their way out of slavery and indentured servitude. And I could keep going, but I usually only share this stuff with folks on the inside. And my real point is that the people on our team and our students, our kids, the people we work with and the people that we train with are are doing badass stuff. And this is just a tiny example of what they're doing. And like I said, it's all based on the same skill, understanding the importance of learning how to start from zero and build an empire. And I'm telling you this because I want you to know that it is possible. You can make a real difference and get rich at the same time. In fact, you will never make a serious change in the world without educating people. And there's almost no education that's more important than helping people realize social mobility and the improved lifestyle and opportunities that come with one dictating their own income and the income of those around them. What I'm saying is that making money makes it easier to make a difference. There's no cause in the world that cannot be helped by more money, or even better, having the people involved with those causes learning how to make more money. You know, on our team we have an informal ranking system. First we have TOTS. These are folks who are usually starting out, and then we have transaction techs or TTs. These are folks who make at least 10 to 30 grand a month. And then we have terminators who make at least 100 grand a month. Now there's a lot of reasons that I recommend you build your company with this kind of ranking system where you use actual names in reference to income levels. And I won't get into all the reasons why you want to do that right now, but I'll quickly say that I've had students who've doubled and tripled their business overnight just by adding names and assigning income levels to those names, because for the first time many of their people on their team finally see a way that they can make a lot more money. That in itself is a lesson. Create a world of opportunity and let people populate it with their ambition. That's a big lesson on its own. But that's not my point right now. I'm telling you this because for years those were the main titles. Those were the main ranks, and that was it. But then we added another title, the ultimate, like, super badass title. It's a name that took some time to come up with, but now it's something that we all agree on, and it sums up the role that you should play, the role that you should aspire to. Everything that I've been talking about so far today, this is what it's all about. This is the role, this is the position, this is the ultimate rank. So what's the name, you ask? Well, here it is. You ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, here it is. Social architect. And that's what this is all about. Becoming a social architect and creating better changes that will last for generations to come. You don't want to be skilled in just getting yourself to the financial promised land, but you want to make sure that the companies you build, the empires you build, are getting other people there as well. This is how you make a generational impact, not just for yourself, but for those around you and for those that you choose to bring around you. So far, everything we've talked about is to make sure that we all get on the same page about this right here. Before we move forward, this should be clear. I want to make sure that we covered all of this so that you and I are in total agreement and understanding of the complete situation. So when I say that this is about learning how to buy and sell companies and real estate creatively and making 10 to 30 grand a month, it's actually about a lot more than that. What this is really about is building a skill that allows you to do two very important things. First, you want to be able to start from zero and climb income levels at will and almost overnight. And number two, you want your company to be a mobility asset for others. And you want to be able to create mobility assets for others. People should be able to come in and get rich working with you. They should be able to build an empire within yours. You should be able to start companies at the drop of a hat and help people realize that income ascension that we've been talking about. And this is totally different than the way people normally build their companies. In fact, just about nobody ever builds their company the right way. The numbers don't lie, and nearly every business will eventually become just another statistic. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way for you. You don't have to be like everybody else. And now that you have a better understanding of the real situation, you can be smarter about the choices that you make. You won't be one of those people who's jumping around from one thing to another or always looking for the easiest and fastest way to make money. It's always a joke when I hear that. And when I hear that, people are trying to figure out how to get on Facebook or how to use Twitter better, or if they're in real estate and they think they need motivated sellers, these people have no clue what this is about. They're not even on the right planet. Your goals should be much larger. If you want to make just a little more money, then this is not for you. If you want to make more money at a job or at a job that you call a business, then this is not for you. And by the way, if you have to work in order to make money, it's a job. It's not a business. Regardless of what you call it, it's not a business. And if all you want is a higher paying job, then this is not for you. If you want to sit at home or on a beach while money comes in so you can do nothing, then this is not for you. This is very seriously, very directly about making a change in the world. I only want to work with people who want to change the world. I really mean that. I know to most people that sounds crazy, but I'm okay with that. Think about it this way. The average person in America lives to be around 75 to 76 years old. That's the average life expectancy. Now, about 1/3 of your time will be spent sleeping and resting, and another 1/3 of your time will be spent eating, talking, standing in line, changing diapers, waiting in traffic, watching porn, whatever, like the small ancillary stuff. So that means you have about 1/3 of your time to spend that is dedicated to work. And this could include the family time too, but I'm including that in the second third. So let's just say you have 1/3 of your time to devote to whatever we call work. So think about an 8-hour workday, for example. That is 1/3 of the 24 hours that there are in a day. So if you're 25, it may seem like you have 50 years left, but in reality, you have something like 17 years left. If you're 35, you've only got about 12 years left. If you're 45 or 55, you've only got about 7 to 10 years left. Now think about that for a second. Time is running out. So let's say you've got about 10 to 15 years left. In that time, in that 10 to 15 years, what do you want to be remembered for? What legacy do you want to leave? Do you really want to be that person that was so self-centered that when your time was up, you made little to no difference in anybody else's life? Do you want to spend your time chasing money only to die just as clueless and broke as the generation before you? Do you want to fail your children and leave them sentenced to those generations of financial darkness that we talked about earlier? That's how most people end up. The real question is, what are you going to do that's different? If you study any of the leaders of humanity, the one thing they understood was that everything you see today is the result of everything you would have seen 100 years ago, which means that what will result in 100 years is the result of what we see today, what is done today, what is done by the leaders of today. And make no mistake about this, you have a choice to make. You can spend your remaining time to make sure that 100 years after the day that you die, the world is different and better because of what you did with your time here. You can live your life as a blueprint and as an example of how others should live theirs. You can make a generational difference, not just with yourself, but with those around you. You can redefine and shape future generations and help others make quantum leaps in their financial literacy and allow them to unlock worlds of opportunity that they otherwise would never have experienced. You can do all that and a lot more, or you can be just like everybody else. So again, just to be totally clear about this, 2 goals of your company. Number 1, it should serve as a mobility asset for you, and number 2, it should be a mobility asset for others. This is a skill, it's not talent. Nobody is born with this stuff. It's skill, meaning it can be learned and taught. And remember, it doesn't matter where you are right now. Even if you're way up here already in the 1%, that's not as important as being able to start from zero and get there. That skill is much more generationally valuable than any other financial asset. And another piece of your company, another criteria for your company is something that we call the ART scale. It stands for autonomous, regenerative, and trainable / teachable. Basically, this means that once you build your company, it should eventually run without any involvement from you, or at least be able to run without any involvement from you. In fact, it shouldn't just run, but it should grow on its own. That's the autonomous part. Every deal that you do should eventually run as its own little self-serving empire, self-sustaining empire. This is another part of the puzzle that almost nobody understands how to do or where to even start. Regenerative, you want to be able to rebuild it at, the drop of a hat. If you lose everything, you should be able to rebuild it. And trainable / teachable is the part where you can train. It's a skill. It's not just talent. It's not something you got lucky to have fallen into. A lot of people in real estate, for example, are like this. They made money during a time when everybody made money and under conditions that were so convenient that it would be delusional to call their financial results the results of skill. You want to be able to do it through skill, not market momentum, but manufactured momentum that you can create. Now, I want to take a second and just take a look at what we've covered so far. You should understand how seemingly impossible it looks for the average person to experience any kind of significant social mobility. It almost never happens on purpose. And the key to making this happen is the right kind of business education. But again, almost nobody in the world, including nearly everybody that's already in the 1%, in that class of financial elite, almost none of them even understand how to do it. So even when you include them, almost nobody on earth knows how to do this. Your goal should be to become a social architect. And becoming a social architect is about a lot more than just making money. It's about creating a generational impact, a generational difference. Yes, you can do this in 20 hours a week or less, but I only use that number because I understand that people may have time commitments and things that they're doing, like a job or an underperforming business or something else that they need to deal with. The goal is to do what you love and to emotionally invest yourself in everything that you do. So from now on, you start doing what you love to do, what you were meant to do. It's almost never real estate, by the way, but the first thing we need to do is get your company to 10 to 30 grand a month the smart way. Then you can finance your passion and do what you really want to do. But you can also do what you really want to do and get to the 10 to 30 grand a month anyway. But my point is, when I say that 20 hours a week, that's just to get started. Eventually, you should be obsessed. You should want to work to spend 80 hours a week furthering your cause. You should want to be obsessed. This is about becoming obsessed with the things that you care about and the changes that you want to see in the world. It's about finding ways to do more, to be more, to give more. You look for excuses to give more of yourself, not less. You want to raise yourself and then those around you, and never looking for the easy way out or welcoming excuses that validate why you're not living up to your potential. In short, a social architect is out to change the world. And I'm asking you, please do not proceed with this application process unless those ambitions match your own. I'm serious about this. I am really serious about this. Working with the wrong people makes this feel like work for me, and it's a nightmare, and my goodness, getting an LC to do anything is like playing tennis with bowling balls. Yes, it can be done, but why bother? It's so much better to focus on better people. And on one hand, it does look like there's a whole bunch of bad news, right? Nobody gets there, the numbers are stacked against you, the ones with power are hell-bent on rigging the game and stealing from everybody. But even with all that said, here's the real secret. Everything that you and I just talked about is bad news. It's terrible news for the unskilled business owner. But if you know what you're doing and you build your company correctly, then none of this is going to hurt hurt you. It's just like anything else. If you get properly trained and you know what you're doing, it becomes easy to execute in any environment. But if you don't, then you're just another statistic waiting to happen, like nearly every business is. But that's only if you allow yourself to become like them. But you don't want to be anything like them, like everybody else, where any one of these issues is just the excuse they're looking for, or even seeking out, or let's be honest, even embracing so that they can rationalize their failures. The real question comes down to, what are you doing to get better? Are you even trying to get better, or are you just waiting for the storm to pass, or even worse, blaming these circumstances instead of having the insight to see them as ladders of opportunity? Are you focusing right now on getting trained to deal with this? And that's the big secret, getting yourself trained, getting educated. You know, growing up in my family, the only discussions we ever had were around formal education. And that's why, like I said, in my immediate family and even people outside of my immediate family, you'll see this, the sea of doctors and lawyers and scientists and, really highly educated people. And that's how they were able to bring themselves up. And that's great. That's what America's all about. The question is, how do you fit into that? Do you plan on becoming a heart surgeon or a brain surgeon? Because that's about the only way that you will experience income class ascension, through formal education. You either go that route or you get yourself trained in another very specific way. And let me be totally clear about something about that route of formal education. I have tremendous respect for it. It's what I saw growing up all around me, and I know that path very well, and I know how tough it is. I saw firsthand with family members and friends of our family. I saw and sometimes helped out, but not as much as I should have, but I saw this studying all night for months and months at a time because they knew that their test scores would follow them and haunt them for the rest of their lives. And I represent kind of the first generation, so I saw them, delivering pizzas while they're putting themselves through medical school, or waiting tables while they were passing the bar exam. I know what it's like to live off credit cards and minimum wage and living paycheck to paycheck until they graduated college well into their 30s with hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes even more than $1 million in debt. And the whole time they never let their guard down, because even just a single bad score on a test or a single bad grade in a class, and it would mean problems after they graduated, which meant problems in getting the right residency, which meant problems in getting the right fellowship, which meant problems in getting the right job offers. It's like this domino effect of crazy that follows you for decades if you screw up for even just one day. It's really an insane amount of work and pressure. And by the way, this whole time, every single day, you have people's lives that are depending on you. People come to you and trust you with their lives. It's nuts. And I have tremendous respect for those guys and gals. I really do. They're awesome. And they should absolutely be getting paid the big bucks, no doubt about it. And they should make a lot more than they already do. Which brings us to you. So that's one route, what I just talked about, right? That is one option, but it's not just about willing to go through all that. You have to be pretty sharp mentally, physically, and psychologically to do all that stuff. So it's not just about being willing to do it, it's about being capable of doing it, which I think anybody is with the right drive, but it does require an insane amount of drive. So that's about the only way that the formal education route will get you where you want to be financially. And given what I just said, I always laugh when somebody suggests that my stuff is hard. It's like, are you kidding me? Do you know the alternative? Hard compared to what? Compared to doing nothing, which is what the LC really wants to do? Yes. Compared to doing nothing, doing anything is hard. Yes. Compared to doing nothing, doing anything is really hard. But this is an important thing to realize, that you aren't trying to go to medical school. You aren't trying to spend an extra 15 to 20 years of school or surgical apprenticeships or learning how to cut open somebody's chest or their head with a saw and then fixing them. So remember, aside from doing that, the other choice you have is you can be born rich or, become the next Steven Spielberg or Muhammad Ali or whatever. So aside from doing that, and again, make no mistake, you and I already went over the numbers. We saw them for ourselves, right? So your only viable option aside from that, the only option remaining is to get trained, to get educated, to learn and master a very specific set of skills that will allow you to beat the unbelievably pessimistic odds. And that's what so many people out there don't understand. It's what many people in my family didn't understand. They valued formal education, but they didn't realize that it was possible to get an informal education that can create the same or better social mobility for yourself and others. Hopefully you've gone through my class on money, and in that class you learn that ever since money was invented about 1,000 years ago, the single biggest difference between the rich and the poor was how they viewed education. Poor people always focus on how much it costs, and rich people focus on how much they can make. Anytime you trade money for education, the single best way to look at it is to look at it as an investment. That means you have an ROI, or a return on money, a return on investment. So the mentality of poor people is to always focus on what it will cost if they do something. Rich people look at what it will cost if they don't. And that's the way you should be looking at getting yourself trained. Because now that you and I have covered, we've gone through the details of social mobility, you really only have two choices. If you want to be able to go from down here to up here, to be able to do that with the criteria that we talked about, all this stuff, with the business in less than 5 years, being able to do it with any kind of reasonable time frame, you first need to realize that almost nobody in the world knows how to do this. So if you want to make that happen, you're in one of two groups. You're either trained and you know what you're doing, doing or you're just guessing. And the other choice, you can choose to do nothing about this, and that unfortunately is the choice that most people choose. They think it's easier to do nothing and sit back and complain about their situation. But doing nothing is not indecision. It is a decision in itself, because if you don't build your empire, somebody's going to hire you to build theirs. So in your life, you are going to build an empire. The only question is, whose empire do you want to build? In your life, you are going to build an empire. It just may not be yours. And obviously that's not what you want to do. You don't want to be guessing either. You need to get yourself trained. And even if you and I never work together, this is a core lesson that I want you to take away. To learn any skill and to perform it with mastery, you must get trained. Now in a second, I'm going to talk about how I train people, and more importantly, why I'm doing this right now, even when it doesn't make very much financial sense for me to do it. But I really wanted you to realize the situation for what it is. It's a mess. The odds are incredibly against you and me, and realistically, our chances for you and me, the chances for normal people like you and me to make it through this minefield are almost zero. That's why it's so important that you find somebody that'll take you by the hand and help you condense centuries of progress into seconds. That's what you want to do. You want to condense centuries into seconds. And I could keep going about the situations that are being created today and every day and just how crazy things are getting. And I do later down below, but right now I'll just sum it up and explain what's happening. More and more money is being made, but it's going to less and less people. There has never been a time in history where being skilled is more important than it is right now. Guys, gals, folks, here's the bottom line. America is on sale, but only a very tiny portion of people will benefit from it. Everybody else will be a victim, knowingly or not. Those that don't get it are gonna suffer terribly. They already are. And this situation is so historically profitable that honestly, I don't even have too much time to talk about it. I'm too busy being in it than having time to talk about it. And that's why I go off the radar and just work with our team and our close students at our business schools. I go off the grid for years, which, makes you wonder, why am I here now? Well, as usual, I want to help out where I can, and as usual, I'm always on the lookout for good people. But that might sound a little interesting, right? Am I really doing all this just to be a nice guy and because I want to qualify some students to work with? I have a few critics and haters. I know it's hard to believe, but there are some people out there that have not fallen in love with me, and these people will doubt that those are my real reasons. So I'll take a second and speak directly to them for a moment, and I will point out that I have been out of the public eye, if you want to call it that, for years, totally off the grid and only accessible to the folks that I work closely with. And for a while I even worked for the government, which I'm still trying to get permission to talk about, so more on that later. And when it comes to working with students, Millie and a few others on our team have basically taken over the Alliance Project, or a lot of the students, so they've been working with students directly, but I haven't mentioned or marketed or promoted anything for years. I've been underground. Why would I do that? There's only one reason I would even dream of doing that, because my business is doing, not teaching. I never wanted to get rich from teaching, and I never have. My income over the last several years from teaching has been less than 3% of my total income. Less than 3%. And I don't even think it's even close to 3% anymore. So it's easy, to question somebody's words, but my actions speak for themselves. Not only do I not care financially, at least, I'm only speaking financially, not only do I not care about working with more students, but I'm so obsessed with the students that I do work with that we're able to build so many companies together that it makes way more financial sense to work with just a very few students than a whole bunch. I learned a long time ago, I don't want to be known for this, and I don't want to work with bunches of students or people who are unqualified and not going to take opportunity seriously. It's an insecurity of mine. It gets under my skin to see that, to work with people like that. That's why people are often surprised when I do this, how hard it is to convince me that they're going to be a good student, and the fact that they have to do that before I or anybody on our team will work with them. What I'm saying is, I'm sharing this with you right now because I want to make sure that everybody is educated enough to know what's really going on, so everybody has a chance, the opportunity to get better, to make a larger change. And honestly, it's like kind of like a do with this what you will situation, because look at it from my perspective. It's not going to make much of a difference to me what you do. The real question is, how much of a difference could it make to you? And I should say that I have novels of student testimonials that can answer that. And by the way, I love bragging, but when I brag, it's not about me. It's about students or people on our team or the kids. They're awesome. I love our people. So when I say that we have the single highest success rate of any formal or informal business education in the world, it says a lot about them. And also, my definition of success is the highest definition stated publicly anywhere in the world, and you can read more about that below. But think about what we were saying earlier about this tornado of WTF that's coming, with these huge companies going in, squeezing out investors and small businesses left and right. This giant, what we call tornado of WTF, it's hitting everywhere. And when it comes to dealing with this, like I said, you're either trained and you know what you're doing, or you're just guessing like everybody else. And when it comes to getting properly trained, I want to share with you, this is one of the biggest secrets in the world when it comes to getting trained. Over 2,000 years ago, a brilliant military general started collecting his ideas together. The resulting book has become one of the most famous and widely referenced works on everything from warfare and diplomacy to leadership and wealth distribution. For over 2,000 100,000 years, these ideas have been used and consulted in nearly every major theater of combat. His name has become synonymous with wisdom, and way back then, he distilled the exact steps in getting trained to perform with mastery. His name was Sun Tzu, and the book is called The Art of War. And leaders from around the world, including every living U.S. president, have quoted or acknowledged Sun Tzu and his influence. So he's a bit of a badass, right? At least he kind of knows what he's talking about, right? Well, he said a few things that are helpful in our discussion here today. Basically, when it came to getting properly trained for anybody to develop a high level of skill, when it comes to raising the performance level of a single individual or an entire army, he said it was no different. There was a simple process that always led to masterful execution. So when it comes to learning any new skill and performing that skill with a high level of precision, here's what Sun Tzu said that you need to do. This is how you get trained correctly. You need to find the right person and then have them walk you through these 5 steps. So you need someone who knows what they're doing, somebody uniquely qualified, and you want them to walk you through these 5 steps. First, they teach you. Then they show you. We learn best through examples. And number 3, then they watch you. And this is a huge disconnect. This is where so many people go wrong. They're not executing under proper supervision. And then number 4, they correct you. And lastly, the most important step, repeat or proceed. Either you go through the steps again and you improve your skill, or you move on to the next thing, but you only move on once you've reached mastery with what you're working on right now. And that's it. Those are the steps in getting masterfully trained. Finding the right person to teach you, show you, watch you, correct you, and then repeat or proceed right there with you. That's it. Teach, show, watch, someone right over your shoulder watching you, correct, repeat or proceed. It's simple, right? Yet so few people ever figure this out. And if you've gone through any of my stuff, you've heard this 1,000 times. This is not just how you learn something, but this is how in your company, how you teach people to build an empire within yours. So earlier when we were talking about buying and selling companies and Subways and Dunkin' Donuts and trading cars for houses and houses for cars and being able to transactionally finance houses and all that stuff, if that's what you learn how to do, that's all a skill. Now here's what my friends and I train people how to do. We've talked about this earlier, how to buy and sell companies and real estate with no money down, no credit checks, no loans, no banks, and 20 hours a week or less, and eventually without leaving your house and making 10 to 30 grand on each deal that you do. Now, how can we train people and have such a high success rate? Because I walk them through each of the 5 steps that we just talked about. I teach, I show, I watch, I correct, and then I repeat or proceed right there with each student. This is the exact process I've used with students around the world, and that's what everybody on our team does whenever they work with students. It's how every aspect of our business is run. It's how every aspect of our company is run. It's how every aspect of our business schools are run. It's how every aspect of everything that we do is run. When it comes to the students that I've worked with, by the way, as you go through more of my stuff, you're going to see for yourself how amazing they do. I'm talking about starting from zero, starting from scratch, starting from nothing, and going on to make 10 grand a month, 30 grand a month, $40,000 a month, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a month, holy moly, $80,000 a month, 90 grand a month, $100,000 a month, awesome, slow down, no I will not, $150,000 a month, 200 grand a month, what the heck, 250 grand a month, $300,000 a month, and I could keep going, but I won't because I don't want to get carried away. And those are folks, by the way, those are folks that started from zero. They started from nothing and having gone on to hit those numbers. And I don't even use the crazy numbers. I want to calibrate it a little and keep it believable. Now, how can I train people to do such amazing stuff and do it so amazingly well? Because I understand this process of training to mastery, and I can walk anybody through it. I just want to make sure that I pick the best folks, the folks that are most likely to do it. The whole thing, this whole process of it getting, having the application and going through the interview. The bottom line is that I want to make sure that I'm talking to somebody who, without a doubt, is going to make this happen, as long as they stay in that same mode. A lot of people, don't have the right mentality, and they're not going to make it happen. And look, I'll be honest, I'm a crazy mofo, man. I work over 8 hours a week. I've never once gone on vacation, like I said. I've never even taken a day off on purpose, and you won't see me acting like a wannabe rapper where I'm bragging about my cars or taking pictures near jets or backyard swimming pools or anything childish like that. In fact, you won't ever even hear me ever talk about anything that I'm doing. Every single time that I'm talking about a model or a technique or some badass strategy, and who can deny the badassery, right? But anytime you hear me talking about anything like that, anytime you hear me bragging, which I do often, it's always bragging about other people. I love bragging about our people, about my friends and students. It's never about myself. My focus is entirely on their performance, their execution, and what they are doing, which is where it should be, right? I mean, think about how much money I make or don't make is really irrelevant compared to how well I train people to do it, right? What I'm doing is only as good as how well I train other people to do it. Whatever I do, whatever financial benefits I've been able to receive or been lucky enough to have gotten, that is only as good as how well I've distilled it into a series of skills and steps and how well I help other people do, right? It's common sense, it's just not commonly applied. It's just not commonly applied sense. And whenever you hear, by the way, whenever you hear someone bragging or that's going on and on about what they're doing, I just keep in mind that the less you've done for others, the more you have to talk about what you've done for yourself. Ah, interesting, huh? So whenever I'm bragging, it's always about my friends and students, never about myself. And this is how we've been able to get encyclopedias of testimonials from around the world, by making sure that other people are trained to do awesome stuff. Also, something else that's really important, I want to make sure we talk about this. When it comes to the financial cost or the money that you trade in order to get yourself properly trained, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about a couple of things for a second. The former president of Harvard University, Derek Bach, once said, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. It's so true, and it's one of the biggest secrets that I've ever learned, is that any time that I've ever wanted to learn how to do anything, I find someone who's doing it the way that I want to do it, and I gladly, cheerfully, and with gratitude pay them whatever it takes for them to walk me through those 5 steps that we just talked about. When I got serious about losing weight and getting in shape, you may already know this, but I lost 100 pounds in 90 days, and to do that, I hired a couple of Hollywood trainers, and I paid them over $21,000. When I first started buying companies, you may remember that I paid Big Rex $30,000 just to spend one day with him. I paid him $30,000 to spend one full day with him. And even with little things like learning how to play the piano, or figuring out how to do the Rubik's Cube, or learning how to raise and breed eagles. With everything in my life, this little secret has always paid off. And I'm telling you this because when it comes to learning this skill that we've been talking about becoming a social architect, you should be grateful to be able to exchange money to learn how to do this. This kind of opportunity that we're talking about, historically speaking, this is what people have fought for centuries for. People have been kidnapped and tortured and even killed. And even today, that's happening even today. Even today, people around the world are willing to give their lives for the hope that they can give their families, they can give the people they care about freedom, finances, or opportunity. What I mean is that when it comes to the financial cost for getting trained, you should look at it as an investment first, but then on top of that, you should keep in mind that instead of having to pay with your freedom or with your blood or with your life, as most people in history have had to do, and by the way, the way that most people in the world even today still have to do, you should be damn thankful to get that you have the opportunity to get to just use your money, to get to just use money. You should be overwhelmed with gratitude in realizing that. You should really get chills, when you think about that, when you realize that aside from having the right attitude, you are lucky enough to be in a position where you get the chance to do this just by trading money for it. How many people right now, how many people in the world right this second are in a position where they can buy hundreds of years worth of progress and generational security? How many people are in a position where they can do that right now? How many people are in a position where they have the opportunity to do that right now? This is what people fight and die for. What I'm saying is that this opportunity to trade money in exchange for getting trained to become a social architect, the right student, the right person that I want to work with, if that's you, then you should be thrilled. You should have goosebumps, you should be filled with joyous gratitude to be able to do this. And now I know that not everyone will have that attitude. There's always going to be in any group of people, there's always going to be some whiny LC. And if you're one of those folks that doesn't see what I'm saying, that's okay. But I can tell you that this is not for you. Right now, what I'm saying right now, this is part of our screening process. And when you and I talk, I will ask you specifically about this. This isn't for everybody, I get that. But for the right person, you know in your heart what I'm saying. And I remember my mother's miscarriage after she had me, and when my little brother was born, he was sick, and I mean like fatally sick. He was in the hospital for months and months getting these experimental injections, and twice we were told that he and my mother would be dead by the morning. My sister and I were cooking and cleaning home alone, cooking and cleaning and taking care of each other while my mom was in the hospital and my dad was at work. We had to grow up fast, and I'm telling you this because I know what it means to not have money. I know what it's like to be made fun of at school because you're wearing the same clothes and you don't have as many outfits as everybody else. I know what it's like to have your parents pick you up in a car that breaks down in front of the whole school. Man, those kids never let me forget about that. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to want so badly to get to the other side and to live that life. I've been without money. And even as an adult, when I screwed up, I had to rebuild, or I got the opportunity to rebuild, I should say. I've been in a situation where I had to leave my house every day and I had to come back with more money than I left with. And I was a single parent at the time, by the way. So I get it. What I'm saying is I get it. The money problems and all the craziness that comes with it, I get it. It's like a domino effect that can send your entire world into a nosedive. You feel that endless pit in your stomach and it doesn't go away, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I'm telling you this because you can permanently get rid of that. And the answer, the only long-term solution to ridding yourself of all those complications and being able to give that gift of its riddance to the people that you care about, the cure-all secret, the one-size-fits-all elixir, is getting yourself trained with the right education, becoming a social architect. So if you're serious about learning, this elusive yet crucial skill, then I beg you, as a friend, as a fellow comrade in capitalism, as a brother in entrepreneurship, please, please, please go through this page very carefully. Take this process of becoming a social architect very seriously. To go through this class again with your spouse or your kids or somebody you care about. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your ambitions, to your future generations. Below are a few important links. You can hear all about me, learn all about my story, how I got here, but more importantly, you'll learn about the models my friends and I have invented and the difference it's made for others. And most important, you'll see the difference that all this can make for you, if you're ready. And that's a big if, by the way. I want to say, and I'm being very clear about this, you've really got to prove that you're ready, and it's not as easy as you might think. And by the way, and one other thing I want to say about when it comes to others that I've worked with, I want to tell you something really important, something I'm putting out there right here, I'm putting everywhere, all over the internet, so this is out there for everyone to see. I learned a long time ago that the only way I was going to get anywhere is that I needed to make sure that anybody who ever trusted me, everybody who ever trusted me, needed to be thrilled with me. I don't have any formal credentials, so if I wanted to get anywhere, I had to keep my people happy. So of all the students and all the clients that I have ever worked with, all of them, every single one of them, and I'm talking in over 15 years now, every single one of them will say some of the very same things. First, let me tell you what none of them will ever say, what you will never hear anyone ever say about me. Not a single person will tell you that I was not there for them. I'm always there for my people every step of the way. Nobody will ever tell you that they reached out or they needed help and I was not there for them. You will never hear anyone say that. None of my students that I've ever worked with will ever say that. Not a single student. Also, not a single student will ever say that I lied, that I misrepresented, or that I exaggerated anything. In fact, they'll tell you that the rabbit hole goes much deeper, much deeper than I ever talk about publicly. You'll never hear a single student say that I did not care for them. You will not hear anyone question whether or not I cared for them. Not a single student will ever tell you that I was hard to reach or I made them talk to an assistant or a cubicle coach or anything like that. If and when I commit to training you, it's me who does the training. I personally take you by the hand and I walk you through everything. And that's another thing that's important, is that you're never going to hear a single student say that they did what I said, that they followed my advice and things did not happen for them. They will all tell you that they either followed my guidance and they got the results they wanted and more, and a whole lot more actually, or they will tell you that for whatever reason they chose not to follow my lead. Because look, I'm not saying that every single student I've worked with has gone on and gotten rich. That's not the case. And remember, below is a link where I actually go through my exact success rate and my definition of success as compared to your other options. It's really important to go through that. But it's not like every student I've ever worked with has gotten rich. That's not the case. But of the students who did not get what they wanted, none of them will ever tell you that they listened to me and they followed my training and spent the 15 to 20 hours a week in the way that I recommend. None of them will tell you that they did what I said. Not a single student. And you'll be able to hear, by the way, you can actually hear from the very students that I'm talking about that didn't get rich, that didn't get what they wanted, and they'll tell you in their own words. I mean, they'll still tell you that Ozum's awesome, he's incredible, he did so much for me, but it was me who made the choice to be an LC. Those are the exact words you'll hear people say. Which, I mean, think about that. How crazy is that? It really speaks to the volume of character that they have. My point is that nobody will ever say that I failed them. Nobody will ever say that my stuff doesn't work. And although I hate to use that word because it implies the burden of execution is on the material and not the student, when in reality the only variable of execution is the student, that's the only question, whether or not you have what it takes. That's one reason why we take this application process so seriously. But either way, you won't hear people say stuff like that. What I'm spelling out here is that I'm far from a balanced person. I'm compulsive, I have an immature sense of humor, I'm highly dysfunctional in nearly every area of my life, but when it comes to this, to building this skill and training people to do this stuff and to do it our way with mastery, I've been really lucky, I've been really fortunate and really blessed. You want to get there, you want to get to the financial promised land, you want a better life for your family, you want to make a generational impact for yourself and with those around you, then you really should take this seriously, because there are some very qualified people that will tell you that I'm the best in the world at what I do. I'm not going to say that, but you should know that it's often said. And the critics that I mentioned earlier, none of those people have ever worked with me. And to the folks who aren't my biggest fans, even with those people, I know in my heart that if they got to know me, I think they'd come around too. I mean, just think about this situation. Every single person who has ever worked with me will tell you the same things over and over again. So when you see all this crazy great feedback from others, you should know that it's only a fraction of what's out there. In fact, one of the most common things that people say to me is, "Awesome, why didn't you use my testimonial?" And honestly, it's like we run out of room, and and it's like at some point you're kind of beating a dead horse, you know? So again, please just make sure you educate yourself with the material below. You're going to learn all about my insanely high definition of success. And when it comes to working with students, what I define as success is something of like, you know, kind of the gold standard. You should really go through that definition of success. You'll learn all about it, and you'll see why I can have such a crazy high success rate with students. You'll learn all about how important it is that I pick and that we qualify and pick the right people to work with. And I realize this isn't for everybody. I don't want to work with LCs or know-it-alls or victims or people who will make this feel like work for me. If we only knew the power of thoughts, we would never think a single negative thought again. This is about a lot more than just getting rich. Only when you change the way you look at the world will you change the way the world looks at you. I've been working with folks for a while, and I know exactly what I'm looking for, so you can follow the directions below and qualify yourself. And if you think you've got what it takes, if you're sure, if you're positive that you have what it takes, I should say, then you can check back or wait until applications are being accepted, and then you can apply. And in that case, I really look forward to working with you. Also, one of the most important links below is a detailed explanation about some of the concepts that I've covered here today. It's some of the most important stuff that I know about money and income class ascension, social mobility, and social architecture, and we go way more in depth on how to get through this tornado of madness that's coming, so you want to check that out too. Okay, so that's about it. Finally, let me say this. No matter where you're at in life, you're going to see that I've worked with people from all backgrounds, all ages, from around the world. It's not where you're from that matters as much as where you want to go. With so much technology and so much opportunity, there's also so much fear-mongering and self-centeredness all around us every day that it's easy to let your ambitions erode to a point where they're obsolete. And although nearly every company will fail and eventually become just another statistic, it doesn't have to be that way for you. But keep in mind, you must move forward. If you don't get where you want to be, you're going to belong where you are. You can reignite those idealistic goals that you once had that you may have buried because you thought you had to be more realistic. Instead of looking for ways to give less of yourself, you can become obsessed with the causes that you care about. There's so much craziness and so many atrocities happening in the world right now that humanity has really been undervalued. In every corner of the world, somebody is needed. There's a need for somebody to raise humanity. There's a need for somebody to raise people up, to make them expect more and do more, to make them expect more of themselves and the people around them. You can be that person. You can help solve these problems in the world. You can fight it and have a superhero impact. You can do more, be more, give more, and create a change and create changes and impacts that'll last for hundreds of years after you're gone. You can make sure that a generation from now is better off because of what you did with your time here today. That's exactly what our people are doing every day, and it's all based on the same skill. So when they say we build empires, it's more than just a saying, it's a way of life. You should be losing sleep over how much more you could do. And given that there's so much more you could do, and that you have so much more potential than you're living up to, why on earth would you settle for less? Make your time here matter. Never settle. Make your time matter. Your interview has already started. The directions are all on this page. If you're right for this, if you're the right person for this, then I promise you'll never look at the world the same again. Together, we can build empires. Thanks again, and thank you so much for the support and everything. I really appreciate it. All right, we'll talk soon. The interview has already started. The instructions for the application are below. Thanks again, and God bless.